and welcome back to 303. We are in Senior English A, and we are working with the great Anglo-Saxon epic poem Beowulf. I am with you in your hymnal on page 52, and we now are going to turn to the second part of Beowulf, and more particularly to the famous battle with Grendel's mother, as it's often referred to. I want to pause for a moment, though, simply because your textbook is providing this information for you. And do you see that it says there, World Literature Connection on the side of page 52? Let's go ahead and look at that for just a moment, because we're trying to make some connections, some relationships to other texts. What do we call that in our learning and reading approach, our annotative approach? To our 3A, right? Relationship to other titles. So the information that's written right here on page 52, we definitely want to include in our notes at 3A. Let's look at it really quickly. Battling demons in the Ramayana. That's how we say that word. Ramayana. Whoa, what is that word? Let's read and see. Beowulf's fight with Grendel touches on a universal theme. Tales of heroes who battle monsters or demons are common in world literature. One of the most famous battles occurs in the Ramayana, the Hindu epic poem that is as well known in India and other areas of Asia as Bible stories are here. The Ramayana is part of a living oral tradition, that is to say it was told long before it was ever written down. Even today, traveling storytellers recite the tales to large audiences. The hero of this epic is the virtuous prince Rama, husband to beautiful Sita. Rama's enemy is the demon king Ravana, who has 10 heads and 20 arms and lives with his warriors in the land of Lanka. After Ravana kidnaps Sita, Rama must wage battle against the demon king to rescue his wife. Of course, this sounds, again, very similar, right, to any number of books, movies, TV shows we're familiar with, right? While Beowulf's battle with Grendel can be told in a few minutes, Rama's attack on Ravana requires many hours over a series of nights to recite. Recite means the story has been memorized, right? Both poems feature heroes who ultimately triumph over creatures of supernatural strength and size. And then the connection to the literature question is a fascinating one, and I hope that you write it down in your annotations and think about it. What do you think makes the battle with Grendel feel so compelling despite the brevity of the description? We'll now turn to the battle with Grendel's mother. And it's here on page 52 that we will begin our reading. But notice there's a little bit of language here right before that we'll read in italicized. Do you see it? Beowulf resolves to kill Grendel's monstrous mother. He travels to the lake in which she lives. So here we go. Now we're going to have the second part battle. You can write it down this way at level 1. And we've said this before, but I think it makes sense to reiterate. The Beowulf epic is an epic of 3 parts. And the 3 parts are easily understood or divided up by the 3 monsters that Beowulf has to fight. In part 1, he fights Grendel. In part 2, he fights Grendel's mom. Okay? We'll get to part 3 where he fights the dragon. Okay? Let's take a look now at the battle with Grendel's mother. Then Edgethrow's brave son spoke. All right? That is to say, Beowulf. Right? Remember Hrothgar, O knowing king. Now, when my danger is near, the warm words we uttered, and if your enemy should end my life, then be, O generous prince, forever the father and protector of all whom I leave behind me here in your hands, my beloved comrades left with no leader, their leader dead. Let's pause for a moment and say 2 things. First comment is for 2B. 2B. In the Beowulf epic, the Anglo-Saxons were most interested not in the action of this poem, but rather in the speeches of this poem. Beowulf is ready to go out and possibly die. Before he leaves, he gives a speech. Let's jump to 3A really quickly. Can you think of a movie? A lot of sport movies will have this element, but others as well, where before the action goes forward, you have to have a speech that's given. You have to have someone give words, right? And these are going to be powerful words. Number 2, let's jump back up to level 1 really quickly. Beowulf says to Hrothgar 2 things. Remember me if I die. And 2, take care of my men. This shows that Beowulf is a man who is concerned with those who are underneath him as his soldiers. And he says, I want my guys to be taken care of. Will you make sure my guys are taken care of? I'm back now on page 53, okay? And the precious gifts you gave me, my friend. Beowulf, continuing to talk with Hrothgar. Send them to Hygelac. May he see in their gold and brightness the Geats' great lord, gazing at their treasure, that here in Denmark I found a noble protector, a giver of rings, whose rewards I won and briefly relished. Now, I want to pause for a moment and point out, one reading of the Beowulf epic is it's almost like a guide to kings. Not unlike, for example, Machiavelli's classic title, The Prince, where kings are told what? 2 things. 1, you have to be a great and mighty warrior. You have to be courageous. You have to be brave. You have to be willing to die for your people. 2, good leaders are generous. Ring bestowers is the king often referenced here. Ring bestowers. In other words, don't be greedy with your stuff if you're a king. Share it with your warriors. Let's go ahead and make an observation. When Beowulf kills Grendel, he is given lots of treasure. Beowulf says to Hrothgar, if I die killing Grendel's mom, will you please make sure my treasure gets back to King, back in Geatland, Hygelac? In other words, will you please make sure that the stuff you gave to me is taken back to my king? Beowulf is then still interested in taking care of others, right? So we have legitimately the argument for a hero here. He now, Beowulf, will turn on page 53. I'm with you now at lines 463 and following. And he will turn to Unferth. Your footnote at the very bottom of 53 will tell you that Unferth is a Danish warrior who had questioned Beowulf's bravery before the battle with Grendel. And now he's going to turn to Unferth. And you, Unferth, let my famous old sword stay in your hands. I shall shape glory with Hrunting, the name of a sword, or death will hurry me from this earth. Let's pause for a moment and make a couple of observations. The Anglo-Saxons, very much about their weapons. I would write that down. The Anglo-Saxon warriors, very much about their weapons. Are you ready for this? They name their swords. They name their weapons. They name them. They give them names. They consider these weapons then to be very sacred. Of course, in the English-British tradition, the most famous sword is the great sword of King Arthur, Excalibur. But we're going to see lots of examples of this kind of thing of naming your weapons. Let's jump to 3A really quickly. Do you have a movie? Do you have a video game you're familiar with where a weapon is given a name and special status? The weapon might even be considered magic in some way. Notice here, Beowulf will say out loud, I will take with me down to fight Grendel's mother the sword called Hrunting. Now we got to pause for a moment and ask an interesting question at level 2A. Question. Why, when Beowulf gets ready to go fight Grendel, he says, I will fight Grendel without any weapons, barehanded. But when he goes to fight Grendel's old mother, he weapons up. He gets weapons. He gets a sword. He wants a sword to fight against Grendel's ma, the old hag lady. But he doesn't want any kind of a sword or weapon when he's fighting against the monster Grendel. Couple of answers here. 1, the first answer is we have a sexual double standard at play here. Do not miss it. The idea is very simple. When you're fighting against the male monster Grendel, you can go face to face. When you're fighting against the female monster, Grendel's mother, she's going to fight a little bit differently. You better put on some armor and you better get yourself a sword, because she will be a trickster of sorts. She will have magic, and she will attack you not straight on, but from another perspective. Okay? This has led many people, and now we're working at level 2A, this has led many readers of this poem to point out that the monsters of Beowulf actually can represent or symbolize different kinds of evils or threats. Grendel can represent an evil threat that comes right at you. You can see it coming 1,000 miles away, right? But Grendel's mother is going to be a different kind of evil. It's an evil that you don't see coming. For example, pride or jealousy. You don't always see that one coming, right? So first day of school, your pal comes driving into the back parking lot in a brand new pickup truck. And you go, "Oh, I am so grateful, so happy for my friend. She lives in a house where they go out and buy her a brand new vehicle. That is so awesome." Or are we more inclined to say, "Oh, I hate rich kids who get everything. First chance I get, I'm keying that pup." Now wait a minute. Why? Why? Where does that jealousy come? Oh wait, that's a more hidden kind of attack. Would you agree with me? Right? And so Grendel's ma kind of seems to have that notion, right? That is to say, you have to be prepared in a different way. The second reason for maybe why Beowulf is going to go down into the underworld to fight with weapons is that he's going down into the underworld. Notice, in the first part, the monster comes to him. In the second part, he's got to go to the monster. And to go to the monster means he's got to go through some really bad experiences, some nasty, nasty terrain. Jot down at 3A, what is your favorite video game, your favorite movie that plays this game? To get to the bad monster, you have to go through a series of mazes or problems. I once had a student that said, "Dude, almost every video game I play is somehow built off of this poem." And I went, "You got it. This is a very famous, famous poem. It's had tremendous influence in Western thought." Notice that Beowulf is going to give Unferth, who earlier in the poem, although it's not in our text, actually they're kind of enemies. And Beowulf is now going to turn over his sword to Unferth. That is to say, he says to Unferth, "If I die, you can have my weapon." The idea of handing weapons down from one generation to the next, very, very old concept. All right, let's go back to page 53, and we're working now on at line 467 and following. As Beowulf's words ended, he leaped into the lake, would not wait for anyone's answer. The heaving water covered him over. For hours he sank through the waves. At last he saw the mud of the bottom. Now, this is the part, and we have many of them, don't we? This is the "yeah, right" part. I just call it the "yeah, right" part because when I used to tell these stories to my little daughter, she would get to parts like this and say, "Yeah, right." Like, you know, nobody can do that. You know what I mean? If you're skeptical, you go, yeah, right. Notice here, he swam for hours and hours through the water to get down to the bottom, right? Our poet's simply telling us Beowulf can do things normal people cannot do. That's why we call them superheroes. They do things that normal people can't do. And so down he goes, down into the nasties. Notice there's mud at the bottom. And all at once, are you with me? Line 470. Again, try and read this on your own. Try to engage in the reading yourself with me helping you. See if you can do it together with me and see how well it goes for you. And all at once, the greedy she-wolf who ruled those waters for 100 years discovered him, saw that a creature from above had come to explore the bottom of her wet world. She welcomed him in her claws, clutched at him savagely but could not harm him, tried to work her fingers through the tight ring-woven mail on his breast, but tore and scratched in vain. In other words, the armor is going to protect him. The metal mail is going to protect him. Then she carried him, armor and sword and all, to her home. He struggled to free his weapon and failed. Whoa! So in other words, Beowulf is not having so easy a time of it already, right? The fight brought other monsters swimming to see her catch, a host of sea beasts who beat at his mail shirt, stabbing with tusks and teeth as they followed along. Then he realized suddenly that she brought him into someone's battle hall, and there the water's heat could not hurt him, nor anything in the lake attack him through the building's high arching roof. A brilliant light burned all around him, the lake itself like a fiery flame. Then he saw the mighty water witch and swung his sword, his ring-marked blade straight at her head. The iron sang its fierce song, sang Beowulf's strength. But her guests discovered that no sword could slice her evil skin. I'm at the top of page 54. That Hrunting could not hurt her, was useless now when he needed it. They wrestled. She ripped and tore and clawed at him, bit holes in his helmet, and that too failed him. For the first time in years of being worn to war, it would earn no glory. It was the last time anyone would wear it. Notice at this point, the listener of the story, now us, the reader of the story, maybe pause and wonder, whoa, is Beowulf going to buy the farm here? This may be the end. By the way, this is what makes, of course, telling and listening to a story so much funner than reading a story. Because when you're reading it, you can look ahead and go, oh, well, there's more lines, which means he must not die yet. But when you're hearing, you don't know, right? Is this going to be the end? Whoa, this may be the end of Beowulf. We'll keep reading. Again, I'm on page 54, line 502. But Beowulf longed only for fame, leaped back into battle. He tossed his sword aside, angry. The steel-edged blade lay where he dropped it. If weapons were useless, he'd use his hands, the strength in his fingers. So fame comes to the men who mean to win it and care for nothing else. It's a famous line. Read it again with me. So fame comes to the men who mean to win it and care about nothing else. In other words, you have to care about being remembered. It's got to mean something to you, the Anglo-Saxon poem says. And then and only then will you actually be remembered. He raised his arms and seized her by the shoulder. Anger doubled her strength. He threw her to the floor. She fell. Grendel's fierce mother and the Geat's proud prince was ready to leap on her. But she rose at once and repaid him with her clutching claws, wildly tearing at him. He was weary, that best and strongest of soldiers. His feet stumbled, and in an instant she had him down, held, helpless. Squatting with her weight on his stomach, she drew a dagger, brown with dried blood, and prepared to avenge her only son. But he was stretched on his back, and her stabbing blade was blunted by the woven mail shirt he wore on his chest. The hammered links held. The point could not touch him. He'd have traveled to the bottom of the earth, Edgethrow's son, and died there if that shining woven metal had not helped. And holy God, who sent him victory, gave judgment for truth and right, ruler of the heavens, once Beowulf was back on his feet in fighting. 2 observations for your notes. 1, a warrior is only as good as his armor. Right? You got to have good armor, or you're not going to get through the battle. Number 2, notice here again a reference to deity. God is on Beowulf's side, right? Giving, of course, the reader and the listener the understanding that it's all going to be okay. Beowulf is going to be fine. He's going to get through this in the end. Continuing. Then, I'm on page 54, line 530. Then he saw, hanging on the wall, a heavy sword, hammered by giants, strong and blessed with their magic, the best of all weapons, but so massive that no ordinary man could lift its carved and decorated length. He drew it from its scabbard, broke the chain on its hilt, and then, savage, now angry and desperate, lifted it high over his head and struck with all the strength he had left, caught her in the neck, and cut it through. Broke bones and all. Her body fell to the floor, lifeless. The sword was wet with her blood, and Beowulf rejoiced at the sight. Whoa, let's pause for a moment at level 1 and just make a couple of observations. 1, Beowulf just about gets jacked. 2, the only thing that saves him is a sword. Not the sword he brought with him, not Hrunting, but another sword. Notice it's a sword she has hanging on the wall, and a sword that was made by giants. It's a magic sword. It's a sword that is sharp enough to actually cut through her body and kill her. I'm on page 55. By the way, just to point out, since we're in the middle of this conversation, notice on page 54, under literature and context and the science connection that's made here. And we're always, aren't we, trying to integrate our studies, aren't we? Take a look and see. Some of this weaponry has been discovered, by the way. You can Google this on your own. Some information as well on YouTube. There's a lot of finds about, people read this poem and they were like, I wonder if this stuff about these weapons is for real or if it's kind of all just made up. There's a picture of one of those sword hilts right there for you on page 54. Read with me. Anglo-Saxon metalwork. The sword that Beowulf discovers, the one we just read about, is said to have been magically forged by giants, a story reflecting the scarcity and value of swords in Anglo-Saxon times. To form a sword, highly skilled smiths had to heat ore to the melting point of iron at 2,800 degrees, cool it, and then add carbon. The result was a hard, durable metal. A smith's work did not stop at a strong, sharp edge, but included the ornamentation of the sword hilt. Handsomely adorned, a sword was at once a deadly weapon and a work of art. Both usable iron and the skills needed to work it were scarce, and a sword's noble owner treasured it, treating it as an individual. Some swords, like Beowulf's Hrunting, were given names. Notice the question here. Besides its ornate hilt, what else makes Hrunting valuable property? You might think a little about that. Obviously, the fact that it's probably been handed down over generations of time, right? Let's jump to 3A really quickly. What is for you your favorite video game where the weapon is everything? What is your favorite movie where a weapon is the center of the whole story? Some weapon has so much power and is somehow kind of almost like magical of a kind, right? Fascinating stuff. Let's go back to page 55 now.